Xiaoyu began to unleash a powerful flame towards the knights, who quickly realized that this attack was very strong. So they used their last ability, a joint skill called Knight's Oath, which allowed them to merge their health points in defense, increasing them by 400%. They tried to resist, but it was in vain. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyu's powerful flame destroyed them, burning them until they turned into ashes. While the corpses of the knights were burning, with a murderous look, Xiaoyu began to stare at them intently. In order not to be burned by Xiaoyu's attack, Lu Fan created a barrier around himself. Now that the knights were dead, floor 99 was successfully cleaned, and thus, Lu Fan reached level 20 and Xiaoyu reached level 15, and she also obtained a new ability called Great Cataclysm. While he was holding the dagger with one hand, he extended the other towards the system window, and with a smile thought it wasn't strange that Xiaoyu had obtained a new ability after leveling up. Now they only had to clean the last floor of the tower. At the same time, in the surveillance room, the director of First Middle School approached the screen and, upon seeing Lu Fan, he was amazed. He explained to the others that the portal on the top floor of Nightmare Trial had opened. Upon hearing this, Shanhai also approached and was left speechless. Shanhai quickly set aside his emotions, put his cigarette back in his mouth, turned his head slightly towards the others, and with a smile told them that today they were going to witness something historic. Director Bai stood up, began to look at Lu Fan with a surprised expression, and asked the others what kind of monsters were going to appear on the 100th floor. At the same time, while the entire castle was burning, Lu Fan approached the king's throne and saw that there was a sword stuck in it. While holding the dagger with one hand, he grabbed the sword with the other, put his foot on the throne, and began to exert force to pull out the sword. Upon seeing this, Director Bai quickly realized what was about to happen. He revealed to the others that it was simply that the tower did not want the students to pass the trial. With a serious look, Lu Fan began to stare at the sword, then he grabbed the handle and with force pulled it out of the throne. Once he pulled the sword out of the throne, it disappeared and the entire castle was engulfed in a red flame. Upon witnessing this, Lu Fan became somewhat confused and began to wonder what was happening. Meanwhile, on the other side, Xiaoyu simply sat behind him and remained silent, ready to face any new monster that appeared. Lu Fan knew something was not right. As he turned his head to the side, he saw that the sword was surrounded by a powerful energy. Then, slowly but surely, the sword started to disintegrate and return to the throne. Little by little, he began to turn his head to one side, and with a serious look, he thought that this was the 100th floor. The throne that had been previously destroyed by Xiaoyu reappeared. And not only that, but the king also appeared, who was sitting on its throne and holding its sword. The knights they had just defeated also appeared, and not only that, but hundreds of undead soldiers also appeared on the ground. This was the 100th floor of the Nightmare Trial. Lu Fan turned his body towards them, began to stare at the king, and thought that they had to clean up this secret realm called Broken Kingdom to pass the Nightmare Trial. The king, who was sitting on its throne, began to summon more undead soldiers, who unsheathed their swords and with a murderous look started staring at Lu Fan. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform him that the number of undead soldiers exceeded 500. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan quickly realized that this was the king's complete army. The king wore a hood and powerful armor with a heavy sword as its weapon. The king's stat window appeared. It was the Emperor of Destruction, level 60, and the boss of the Nightmare Trial. Lu Fan thought that Xiaoyu had never transformed into her World Destroyer form. Xiaoyu's skill window appeared. She had obtained a new skill called Great Cataclysm. This skill was damage-based and had 3 stages. Xiaoyu could launch fire bombs throughout the flying zone, causing a significant amount of damage and applying burns. Upon completion, she would dive down towards the target area to inflict a large amount of damage and detonate the burned area once again. Lu Fan opened Xiaoyu's skill window, and as he scrolled through the interface using his finger, he thought it was time to witness her Dragon of Destruction form and her new abilities. He reached out to the side and closed the system window, then started looking at the boss, and with a smile he asked Xiaoyu to do her best because he wanted to clear the last floor of the tower and obtain the reward from the grand exam. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyu stood up, began to stare at the boss, and started roaring to indicate to Lu Fan that she was ready. He unsheathed the dagger, began pointing it at the king, and ordered Xiaoyu to transform into the Dragon of Destruction. Upon hearing his command, Xiaoyu started staring at the boss with a murderous look and began roaring. Then, she extended her hands to the sides and began to transform, causing her body to be engulfed in flames. First, her wings changed and became much larger, and then her body. Now she was much bigger and more powerful than before. While her body was surrounded by flames, she extended her hands to the sides and started looking at the boss. This transformation, called Dragon of Destruction, was of legendary quality. In this form, she had a strength of 1484 points, an agility of 2055, a spirit of 7202, and a resistance of 2903 points. Since she had transformed for the first time, the system granted her 2 new abilities as rewards. The first one was called Annihilation of Everything, and the second one was called Lava Explosion. Director Bai started to look at the screen, and when he saw her new transformation, he was speechless because he couldn't believe that she had a third transformation. While Shanghai was holding the cigarette in his hand, he slightly turned his head back and was somewhat amazed to see the blazing flames. He realized that Lu Fan had an ace up his sleeve. The boss stood up, began pointing its sword at Lu Fan, and gave the order for the entire army to attack and protect the king. Upon hearing the boss's order, over 500 undead soldiers unsheathed their swords and, with a murderous look in their eyes, began to advance towards Lu Fan. Lu Fan unsheathed his dagger and, gaining momentum, started moving quickly towards them. He looked at the boss and with a smile asked Xiaoyu to prepare for the challenge. He was ready to fight against the entire army of undead from the fragmented kingdom. She didn't stay behind, and also gaining momentum, she started to fly and follow him. While Xiaoyu was flying and heading towards the boss, the undead soldiers also gained momentum and began attacking Lu Fan. But they were no match for him, so he started defending himself effortlessly using the dagger. While he was fighting against the undead soldiers, he started to look up at the sky and with a shout, he gave Xiaoyu the order to use the ability Great Catastrophe. She obeyed him and used the ability. Once she activated it, her eyes began to emit powerful and suffocating flames. The ground slowly started to crack, and several seconds later, a huge explosion occurred, killing many undead soldiers. Then, she started flying around the area and began throwing powerful flames towards them. In the blink of an eye, she killed more than half of the king's army, leaving only 173 undead soldiers. This ability allowed her to create explosions in the area she flew over, causing a great amount of damage and inflicting burns. Upon seeing how powerful she was, everyone was in shock. The director of the first middle school was left speechless and asked the others if this really was an ability that students could master. Shanghai was shocked and amazed. He couldn't believe that the army of undead soldiers had been almost annihilated in the blink of an eye. Director Bai was so paralyzed by what he was seeing that he didn't say a single word. While Xiaoyu was eliminating the undead soldiers, Lu Fan gained momentum and began to quickly advance towards the king's throne. Now there were only 42 undead soldiers left. The undead knights were not going to allow Lu Fan to approach the king, so they took a leap, unsheathed their weapons, and prepared to attack. The knights attacked Lu Fan, ordering him to kneel before their king, but he simply jumped aside and effortlessly dodged the attack, causing the knights to crash into the ground. Lu Fan knew that being alone he wouldn't be able to face the knights, so he turned his head to one side and with a shout called Xiaoyu, giving her the order to come to him. Upon hearing his command, she began to descend rapidly towards the knights. With a murderous look, she prepared to use the second stage of her ability, which allowed her to dive towards the targets and cause a great amount of damage. She descended upon the knights, then spread her hands to the sides and used the third stage of her ability, which allowed her to land near the target and then detonate a flame bomb. By doing this, her body began to emit intense flames. Director Bai was shocked as he couldn't believe that the 4 knights had been killed in an instant. Shanghai slightly turned his head towards the screen, and with a confused look, began to wonder if it was possible to test Lu Fan's true power even in the most difficult trial. The director of the first middle school caught everyone's attention. He crossed his arms, started looking at the leaderboard, and revealed to everyone that Lu Fan had 999,000 points, a score that hadn't been surpassed in 30 years. He started questioning whether Lu Fan would be able to obtain the reward from the grand exam. Director Bai also approached him, and while he was stroking his beard, he began to look at the leaderboard and explained to them that this year's exam was the most difficult, so the rewards and qualities of the items were going to be very good. At the same time, Lu Fan finished off the undead knights, extended his dagger to one side, and while his body was surrounded by intense flames, he began walking towards the king. He stared at it intently, and now that he had eliminated all of the subjects, he decided it was time to eliminate the final boss. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.